Kevin, can I just start as a writer, just asking you about the first paragraph of your book? And I hope you'll forgive me if I read it out loud. It's short. He speaks in your voice. This is Angel. He speaks in your voice, Dublin. And there's something hopeful in the new edges of his words and phrases that has come through revolutions, generations, and across continents to be witnessed here on these streets now. I think that's a beautiful opening paragraph. And what I wonder first, if you could tell us, did that come as the beginning? Did you labor over it? It seems effortless. It seems absolutely beautiful way of starting the book.
Yeah, thanks, Colm. Great to be speaking with you to start with, all the way from New York. It's so cool. That came first. That was literally the first line in the piece. I would have written it maybe 6-7 years ago in school. During a Leaving Cert exam, I was supervising I was a reader in one room for one student, and the student left. And I remember just writing that line. I'd obviously been reading a bit of Don DeLillo at the time. I literally take the first line from, he speaks from In Your Voice American, so from Don DeLillo's Underworld. It was the same kind of thing, and it's just the same kind of epic response. But that was there from the start. But you know yourself, it was worked on so much. Even a year ago, I was submitting to see if a piece of the book would be put into a literary magazine, a little excerpt. And I remember emailing the editor and asking him about the first line, whether we put in have or has, and where do we put the stress? Is it on hope or is it on the language? And we settled on hope was where we stressed. So I'm glad we settled on that.
But the second thing I want to ask you is about Balbriggan itself, about the idea of its history. And there's several mentions of a monument, of a massacre, of something that had happened in history, that it doesn't deeply affect the characters, but it's just there in the background. It's like a code. It's like a sound you pay special attention to. The idea that this is not, while this book is very much a book of the present, it's alert to what happened more than 100 years ago.
Yeah, history's, especially in Balbriggan, history is always present. You can't get away from it. It's like the sack of Balbriggan is what the town is famous for, and then even the name Balbriggan, Balbriggan's the trousers. So as a town and as a word in itself, Balbriggan, it's steeped in history. But I think the point I was trying to make was that's old history, and I think the line from Princess in the middle of the book is that what they're living through is to become history. They are the new topic of history that we'll be looking back in 50 years' time and saying, they were creating history. And especially coming out of the back of COVID times, it felt as if we were living in a definite historical epoch or a new kind of time. I think Princess was the one who, through our history project, was able to grasp that. So, history is here. It's in Balbriggan. It's literally on the streets, and you can't miss it when you walk down Main Street. They have the big mural to a stabbing, to black and tans and to colonialism and imperialism. It's there. It's present. It's always on the streets. And I thought that was an interesting way to juxtapose that with the idea of violence in the year 2020, the 21st century, I suppose.
Talking about history, and I'm thinking that in 100 years' time, if a historian wanted to look at a place where you could see the change in Ireland, you could see a new Ireland coming into being, that Balbriggan would be, instead of being the sacking of Balbriggan 100 years ago, in 100 years' time, the Balbriggan of now would seem like a cauldron, I suppose, in which a new Ireland came into being, which was effectively multicultural.
Yes, I think the way I looked on it, and I've said it in many talks and interviews and the rest, is ultimately Balbriggan is Ireland's future now. And a number of things have kind of come together to make that happen. And there's a lot of pressures on the town as a result of that, because people aren't, yourself, from all sides of the political persuasion. And I was conscious of this when I was writing the book, and I wanted to make sure that I got the details right and try and show the town as it was and how the people living in the town as they were, without judgment and being impartial to what's going on. But as I was saying as well, I was privileged position that I'm in the town, in the school that I'm in, and the classrooms that I'm in, that they have, as I said, 50% second generation immigrants would be in front of me in the classroom. So this way of living and this way of interacting and this way of solidarity, the way the students get on, the way we get on, had to be written about and had to be discussed and had to be dug down into and see what you uncover and what stories you can tell from that. And that's why, to me, the details in the town and rendering the town as it is right now, like you said, felt very important, because you are documenting, I think, genuinely think, the birth of something and the beginning of something.
I think your novel Youth is important as a document that documents this, but it's also, of course, a novel, and it's also filled with characters. And what you're doing is you're, in a way, creating people who rise above their mere historical moment or their race, or what it is they're doing within a multicultural Ireland to become themselves, and that this is the great project. But in order to do that, you have to create a sort of low-grade racism that is just there all the time, throbbing in the background, that arises at a certain moment when, for example, Barry has all sorts of views, the government and refugees, and how Balbriggan, there's a lovely line, Balbriggan needs to be given back to Balbriggan people. And he talks about Balbriggan shops for Balbriggan people. Obviously, that's one extreme. It really only happens once at this moment in the book. But there's a really wonderful moment where a woman goes into a chemist shop and she sees two people who are not white, and she presumes they have to be mother and daughter. And she doesn't mean any harm, but it's a lovely little moment where you just see people's inability to make distinctions and how offensive something can be that isn't meant to be there. But these are very small things against a much larger picture, which is of not only people struggling, but people becoming themselves in a way that happens in all novels, where you watch someone confronting their destiny with a certain set of characteristics, up against hurdles, using choices, using chances. And what you're doing is you're rescuing these characters from being merely statistics or being merely figures in a sort of document that shows how Ireland is changing. These characters rise above that. I think it's an important element in your work as an artist.
Yeah, there's a number of things at play there, and I think you live and die by the characters, but also how well drawn they are. So it's easy to throw out a character like Tanya and Dean and Angel and Princess, but unless you render them and you create them in such a way that they're believable, they lie flat on the page. So small things such as the incident in the chemist and Barry and the rest, I have to be aware of them and see them in the character's view. Like, so for Princess, for example, if I didn't have those details and I didn't have that sense of who she was and what she had to deal with and low level stuff like that, the character wouldn't be able to breathe on the page, and it wouldn't be a real character. If that it sounds ridiculous, but the character wouldn't be believable. So that's what I was constantly kind of struggling with, and making sure that it was right on the page and the character was able to be believable, if that makes any sense to you at all.
And I think the way you work with this is that you use your ear as much as your eyes. That, when the first time I come across the feds, I realized, oh, that's what they must call the cops, the feds. And I love it. I love every time it comes up, and I love realizing what it is. I love allow. Could you just take us through allow? Because I've started to say allow now. Yeah. And if you could advise me as to how to use allow.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just I'm a cipher. It just comes through me. But no, the language like that is, that took a while. It's you can't just, like, the story I tell people, I'll tell you as well, is that I had a class about 6 years ago, and it was a English and communications class. So we just took a dictionary of language, slang language, and we put up on the board, and I'd gather it up over the weeks. But so there are words like that, but then you have to see them in action, and you have to, like you say, get the rhythm of them and where they're used. Like, I've seen people just take certain words and plant them onto a line, and they just sound ridiculous. So it's not enough having the word itself. You have to have the rhythm of the sentence and how the word is actually spoken. So the likes of allow is, I presume it's just an exasperation. It's like, oh, come on, allow, or oh, come on. I think it's just come on, or I'd hear Janie Mac. You've heard that from.
Yes.
Even the words like feds, like, you have a choice to make, as I'm sure you know, especially for any vernacular kind of writing. And James Kelman would have been my kind of totem pole for that.
Who would be?
James Kelman.
Yeah.
James Kelman, a huge fan of his. But you make a decision on the vernacular to to just let it live on the page. And like you said, hopefully then people will just go with it. And once you go with it, it's part of the journey. I'm sure you've seen it from the opening third person to the first person to the really closed off third person at the end. My intention was always that you feel distance from these people, and the language should distance you. But then over time, as you get closer to the language, you get closer to the person and you get closer to the characters. And so it was my intention, I'm glad to hear that you're doing it, that the language becomes normalized for you as you're reading a character like Angel, and you understand then what he's saying. And as you understand what he's saying, you start to understand him. You're on that journey.
I mean, I didn't have any trouble understanding it, so it became normalized in that sense. But it wasn't normalized in the sense that I found it exciting and energetic. That it gave me that it created a sort of, I suppose, a sort of fizz on the page, that you were hearing a new sound. And I think you're right that really did happen in Scotland, didn't it? That generation of novelists, from Alistair Gray to James Kelman to Irving Welsh to Janice Galloway, they set about finding a vernacular and then making that vernacular literary and putting it into the novel as though it were normal. This is what language is here, and it isn't received English. It is instead an English that has a funny energy, and that when you see it on the page, it sort of lives for you. It's what W.B. Yeats, when he was talking about John Millington Synge, called a living speech. And I'm reminded of Synge because the idea that in Ireland, 125 years ago, this figure, John Millington Synge, arrived on the Aran Islands. And what he found was a sort of energy that wasn't on what he calls the mainland. He calls it a primitive energy. But what he does with it is he writes his book, The Aran Islands, but then he gives it to the Playboy, the Western World. He has these wonderful women coming in, openly sexual in a country that didn't seem to allow that, filled with I suppose, flavor, texture in their speech, and all of the time willing to have a fresh response to life. If a man came in who murdered his father in the Playboy, the Western World, instead of condemning him or calling the police, they just would wonder, well, what was that like? And so I'm finding the same sort of excitement here, where there's something new happening. And it isn't about race, it's about language. It's about a new way of picking up words, of allowing dialogue to happen. And that the dialogue itself then gives the novel a sort of excitement. And I just wonder if, it's slightly close to Roddy Doyle in the sense of when we read those novels first, realizing he came out, he was a teacher. In other words, he came in as a sort of semi-authority figure into the room and was able to listen and get a real sense of what was behind the words. And I wonder if your job as a teacher helped you in that.
Yeah, there's a few things to say there. It's funny you should say Synge, because I'd always have the idea of, remember Synge, he wrote in his diaries that he'd be above the pub on the Aran Islands and he'd be looking through a crack and he'd be listening to what they're saying and getting the stories from them there. I wasn't quite looking at through a crack. It's in front of me. And like Roddy Doyle as well, you have to be, like, I'm a teacher first. I say this, I'm a teacher first, I'm a writer second, but you have to be smart for what you're doing. I don't have time to go off and research massive novels and do novels that would take a lot of research, basically, because I'm working 9 to 5. So when I go home, I decided to use what was in front of me, like you're saying, and listen to the language in front of me and study the language that I was hearing in front of me, and also study the people in front of me, and use that as a kind of a starting point for a novel. I remember Rob Doyle, who's a writer who I admire, he says, like, the one thing he gets when he is not working full time is the chance to read and to think about things. And when he's reading, he's able to, work into his work. So for me, I don't get a chance to read as often as I'd like, and I wouldn't get a chance to research. So I use what was in front of me as research. I'm lucky enough then to be able to hear the students around me. And it's unfortunately now it's getting to the point with this book. I still stop the kids now, and it's like, so what was that you said? But now they're smart to it. They say, "Oh, you only asking me this question because you want to put it in the next book." I was undercover for the first, the last 6 years. But now they're getting smart. But I'm still listening. And I think for myself, I don't know whether it's to keep me interested in the teaching or whether I genuinely have an interest. I can't work it out, but I'm interested in language. And when you're hearing these words around you and you hear the sentences being spoken and you're hearing the mix of language being put together in front of your ears and eyes, I was drawn to it, and I had to put it on the page. And I'm glad
Yeah,
you said the dialogue.
I mean, there are really wonderful examples. On page 176, for example, he's talking to Princess, and he says, "Allow Princess, please. You know I'm sorry. Don't be extra. Don't be extra." So great. Swear down. I said sorry, yeah. And I mean, an actor. I'm saying it deliberately badly, but an actor could have such a good time with how each word is inflected. But what I'm saying is, as the reader, the whole idea of "don't be extra" is completely new to me. But I found it totally exciting and interesting that "don't be extra." And so that idea of a sort of new language coming into being, as a sort of new sort of town comes into being, as then a new sort of literature is needed to reflect that.
Yeah. Yeah, the lines like that, where you hear them, like, even "don't be extra," like, you reading it there is hilarious. Like, I know I could never read it. And that's one thing when you were writing this, it's like, it would just sound ridiculous for me to ever read it in a reading. So I'd always read the opening when I do it. But that's the kind of the price you have to pay when you're taking other people's words and you're putting them on a page in that kind of regard. "Don't be extra" is one. Don't be, this is long. Don't give me a headache. The list is just non-stop, that you have to kind of stop and ask yourself, does it sound right on the page? But I was lucky enough that I had a audiobook done as well. And there was an actor, Gabriel Adewusi, who did Angel, and he's a brilliant actor. He, like you said, brought an energy to it as well, and he was able to translate it onto the audiobook, which really helped me.
There's something in the novel that I haven't really read before now. Is there's a lot of bad sex in the book, but forget that. I mean, there has to be bad sex. These are young people. They're trying things out. They're all gathered together. If a parent is away, they all gather in the house, and there's a lot of drinking and there's a lot of back and forth between boys and girls. What I was interested in were, I suppose, the idea of how tentative it still is for them, how nervous the boys are, especially. But the girls too, but the boys more than the girls, over what they should do next, how they should handle this. It isn't as though watching pornography as they do, gathering together as they do, with all these new freedoms, the boys are still so afraid, so wondering, was this the right moment? What should they do now? And I thought that was incredibly well handled. And in a way, it's outside, the ideas of whether this is a new town, Balbriggan, or where it is. Just this idea of anyone who's ever been 15 reading this knows, I think this is a brilliant account of what that tentative business with boys and sex is like. And I mean, I'm not asking you, is this autobiographical? I'm talking about this as a literary thing, as bringing in this idea that these may seem super confident in some ways, really not confident in others, but in the middle somewhere, the sex thing is very dramatic.
Yeah, I think that came out more so in Dean. But all the lad characters, I suppose, is the case. Yeah, it's something you see with teenagers, especially. I was once a teenager myself and a young boy, so I'd have knowledge again there as well. But for contemporary boys, you can't get away from porn, and what's their expectations in porn, and the bravado that all that brings, and they're swimming in it. They're swamped by it. It's you can't get away from it. Even as a teacher of 14 years, you've just seen it, and the idea of it, and the ubiquitous nature of it, it's everywhere. And so,
yeah, you're absolutely. I mean, this, for example, with Dean. I mean, he's getting close to being with this girl in a serious sort of way, and he says, "This feels good. I can only groan in reply. I'm freaking out under the weight of everything. I'm scared. From all the porn I've watched, I know a fair bit about horny women." And you go, no, you don't. Like, stop now thinking. But you realize, of course, that he is treating what he's been seeing in porn as very serious indeed, as informative, as almost formative.
yeah.
And he's trying to deal with his own body, his own feelings, versus what he thinks is what's real, which is the porn. And what he's feeling somehow isn't so real.
That's like that is internet brain unfiltered. It's that generation where they can't tell the difference between, as you say, what is real and what is not real. Like, everything they put up online they know isn't real, but yet everything they see back to them they consider is real. So how do you filter out then the porn and then what your friend is posting that's just a happy birthday, I suppose, party? Everything is mixing and merging, and it's something that I suppose my generation and our generation haven't lived through, so we don't know how how would it affect people in their everyday lives. And like I've seen it from my side where teenagers put stuff out online and they're surprised when there's an actual physical or a real life repercussions from it, because to them they've posted it, it's out there, it's not real. But then when you talk about the filter and you talk about porn coming this way, they buy it as real. So it's just such a mixed up idea, I think, the internet, and to grow up with the internet is not something I've done. So I just tried to tap into that and the expectations of how to live with this internet and with this constant stream, and especially for young men and girls from such a young age to be dealing with the idea of porn and the accessibility of it. And then, of course, Tanya has to deal with the real life consequences of actions that become considered porn as well. So it's there. And if you were to write teenagers, and forget about Balbriggan, but if you're to write teenagers now in the year 2022, 2023, you have to address phone usage, which I don't know whether it works or not on the page. I hope it does. But you also have to address the elephant in the room, which is online world and things that they see constantly from an online perspective, which is hard to transcribe onto the page. And that's where we come to Tanya, and the idea of Tanya and how Tanya looks on the page was a kind of a new way to tap into that experience and how to express her internet brain through that page, if you know what I mean there.
Yeah, I think the Tanya scene is I think she's really very dramatic. I found the phone usage where one of the boys, it must be Dean, feels that what's happening to him sexually, which, I mean, he is about to have sex, it seems to me, and he should be delighted with himself. In any other novel, he'd be all ready for this. But what's fascinating about your book is the way, just you're in his mind, and you have the porn on one side, but on the other side, you have his phone. And he's not sure that this is going to be entirely real unless he records it. And it was something I'd never thought about. It's the most dramatic idea that somehow he is caught between two things. His own feeling that he has an idealized sex, which is porn, and his own feeling that it won't be real unless it's recorded. In the middle, of course, is a thing called him. And as the reader, you're completely caught between these three forces, the him, the porn, and the idea, which I'd never thought about. That he would have that he reaches for his phone to see where it is.
Yeah, that comes from just conversations with kids about, not about things like that, but in general, like to be lads that be telling me that they saw someone get a slap or a punch and they got it on their camera, and I'd be like, how did you manage to get your phone out and record it? And their line is, well, the phone is always in my hand and the camera is always on. So it's not like me, person, I'm like, oh, there's something happening, I better record this on my phone. It's an extension of their hand. It's part of their experience of walking down the street. The phone is in their hand.
This is captured very beautifully in a moment where she's having an argument with her mother, and someone in the supermarket's already got the phone to film that tiny little thing in case anything dramatic occurs. It's going to be filmed. Can I ask you? William Faulkner has a novel called As I Lay Dying. Do you know that book?
Of course, yeah.
Can you just take us through that book?
Yeah, As I Lay Dying would have been one of the main books for me. I would have read it a few times when I was writing youth. It's a book from a family, different perspectives like youth, but to be more characters in it. One of the main things for me for As I Lay Dying was, it's obviously in the vernacular, but Faulkner in a Paris Review interview says that Darl is one of the main characters, and he used Darl's language that was his way to write. So everyone else was very vernacular heavy in As I Lay Dying, as you know. But he said Darl was the one person that he could kind of hang a lot of the writerly or the story.
This is a big family, and they're moving across the southern states of America in some way or other with the body of their mother in a sort of coffin. And they're wandering along, but that's not what's important, really. What's important is that each of them gets to speak, and they get it. And sometimes it could be a line, and as you say, it's filled with local flavor and southern speech. And the next one then gets his or her name at the top of the page, and then you get them speaking. And so you never know what's going to happen when you turn the page. But it is a sense. It's not necessarily a chorus as much as, because they don't speak together. but it is as though each perspective comes in to give you a different version. No, it just struck me. I think that book, for every novelist, and even for every reader, maybe, it has a special place. It's called As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. And it just struck me reading this book, hey, this guy has to have read As I Lay Dying.
And even there's, as you'll know, there's one part at the end where I forget the girl's name. She goes into a chemist or a pharmacist, and she wants to get a tablet for, I think a kind of an abortion. And this was a kind of formative for the possibilities of what a multi-voice novel can do. And she goes in and she meets the guys, and they bring her around the back we won't get into it, but they give her a tablet, and she walks away and she's delighted with herself. But then in the next chapter, we get the perspective of the chemist, or the lad working in the chemist. And he tells us that he gave her a paracetamol. Reading that, for me, I remember back in, it would have been my early 20s, it just blown my mind of how you can do that with multi-voiced novel, that you can kind of set something up and then just explode the reader's mind in the next chapter. And it obviously,
there are times where you tell the same story from two perspectives. And what's interesting is you don't do that all the time, so that it's just something that you use when you need it. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, definitely. It was done like as you're getting towards the thin end of the wedge, as you're coming towards the end of the book. It was important that was done. And in the major scenes, like there's a scene where we're on Main Street and Angel and Palumi and Paddy have an argument about the word "all right hour," and I thought that was a kind of, a scene that a major turning point in the book. So you wanted a few perspectives, and then the end part as well, you wanted a few different perspectives, just to you're trying to pull all the strands together for the reader, and you want the reader then because by the end of the novel, the reader should know all the characters at this stage, so they should understand where each of them are coming from and pulling from when they're talking about the same kind of scene. And there'll be a scene on the beach that's repeated 3 times, yeah. And it was important then that we get the character's sense of kind of an end to this kind of the journey that they're making and the journey that they've been on and are going on.
It might have been easier, but it wouldn't have had the same result if you had just given these kids their lives without an older generation. But one of the subtleties of the book, and we're extremely tactful about, is giving them parents. Because that's the hardest thing to do, because it isn't as they're not in permanent battle with their parents, nor are they deeply involved with taking advice from their parents. But the parents are there, and the reader gets to imagine the things like love, dependence, all those things. The reader gets to imagine those, but what you get are single moments where a bit of conflict or a moment of pure connection, but it's jagged. It's rich. It's never direct, and it's not systematic, or indeed it's not, I suppose, symmetrical.
The parents were an important part of the book in a number of ways. There's on 2 levels. I wanted Angel and Princess to be on the journey basically on their own. So I wanted them to establish them, to be talking about the new Balbriggan and New Ireland. They have to deal with the world that they face, literally the main street of Balbriggan, on their own terms. So the parental involvement for them was, yourself, it was in the background. Whereas for Tanya and Dean, they have the weight of, in Dean's case, his father's a famous boxer, so he has to deal with that expectation. And Tanya, of course, has her father and the mother issues. But the parents in all kind of teenage fiction and even in movies, parents shouldn't be there. You don't want them to, if anything, they get in the way and they bog down. You want to see the characters, and especially teenage characters, express themselves freely. In my case, it was on the streets, so that's why I kind of kept home out a lot. But intentionally for Princess and Angel, they were kept out to just show you that these are basically people out on their own. They have to deal with this world on their own and on their own terms. Their parents obviously have been on a different journey, and the parents know Balbriggan differently, whereas Angel and Princess are starting from scratch, and they have to deal with this world on their own terms.
Tanya has a particular problem, but there's a wonderful moment. I absolutely adored it. I just, if you were to show people, is there one paragraph of this book? It's great. I think is it a girls' football match, and the father runs out on the pitch, and it looks as though he's going to go for the referee. And you think, all right, I get that. But he runs across the pitch, and he just goes for some guy who's on the other side of the pitch and wants to hit him. And of course, you don't know why. You learn why later, but it's a wonderful moment of pure chaos, anarchy coming in from the side, which is what, you think the father's going to be so loyal to his daughter, he's going to do something for her. But you realize, no, that's not how he thinks. and there's something else going on all the time. Just a small touch of the book. You probably, I think, am I right in thinking that those sort of scenes for this book came to you quickly, without having to put much thought into them, that they seem effortless in the way they're done. They seem natural, and they seem I'm not saying you didn't revise the language, but I'm saying those images seem extraordinarily fresh and vivid. And I wonder if they were that for you, that they just came as you were working easily.
Oh, we go behind the curtain here. That scene for Tanya, I'd say, was probably 10 pages, and it was brought down to one paragraph.
Hold on. Oh, we'll go slow. You mean the scene where she's at the match?
Yeah. That would have been probably 10 pages, and over the years, it was brought down to a paragraph. Also, Tanya's father I had a 10,000 word story for Tanya's father, who was in an original version of the book. So all of that was brought down to a paragraph. So it took a while to get down to a paragraph, but I'm glad it runs well and it works well.
I'm really shocked. Sorry, I need to go back now because you really wrong-footed me. This is how you work. That, in other words, that you would go home in the evening, say at 5. You obviously get something to eat, and then you settle down and you would write pages and pages and pages. Do you know you're not going to use them? Do you know that you're drafting and that out of this will come something distilled? Is that how you work?
I do now. That's the way it worked for this one. Yeah.
Did you know then?
No, I didn't, and that was the problem. And you learn as you're writing. And I know, obviously, I've had 2 previous books, but you learn as you go on that's what I should have been doing previously. And I know I've heard Wendy Erskine talk to you, but she writes 3 times too much and comes down. With me, it took that level, and I've learned it now. And for new work, I work the same. I write big, and I'll bring it down. And it needs to have that. I'm not a good enough writer, I think, to, like Colin Barrett, to express myself brilliantly on the page like that. So I think as a writer, I need to now write as much as I can and then go back to it and enjoy the process of going back and enjoy the process of distilling one image, like the father going across the pitch, instead of writing, which I would have, the full football match. And I would have written the father coming out of the house, and I would have written a story from the father's perspective, and I would have written the fight, and I would have written the aftermath of the fight, and I would have written the mother coming in her pajamas to stop the fight. So, but that's a good editor as well. So, yeah.
My feeling is that no writer ever changes, that you have a method you work with, and that you can't do anything to adapt it. But I'm fascinated with that, because I honestly, with that particular scene, I thought this must have come in a flash and been written in a second, because it has that lovely feel of being organic and natural to the moment and perfectly done. And what pleasure it must be to be able to work like that. And now I'm completely wrong.
It was a pleasure to edit like that, but that's what I've learned. I love editing. I love getting down to it. But and again, and you'll know yourself, it's Sean in Lilliput, the editor that I had was just, it's amazing to work with an editor and be able to kind of get down to the essence of a scene like that and write the scene like that and have it feel effortless. But it took a while to get there, as with every paragraph in the book.
This is Sean Farrell at Lilliput.
Yes, yeah.
Would Sean take that 10,000 words and bring it home and come back to you a week later saying, I think you could bring this down to a paragraph? Or would that feeling come after much discussion with him?
No, in that little piece itself, it would have been myself. I would have brought it down to 1,000 words, but then Sean would have said too much, and then we would have brought it down from 1,000 to maybe 300. And that's through the editor process. But all the other characters, that was all the rejections from the different publishers saying there's too many characters, there's too much here, too much there. But when you get a good editor like that, you can trust, who can distill something, and he did that with a few scenes and a few kind of just get rid of that scene and bring this scene right down. And I love that process. I love learning about scenes from that process and seeing someone in work like that, and then coming up with something that reads so easy as that.
Kevin, I think for the rest of your life, people are going to come up to you on the street and say, either I'm Princess, or I know Princess, I know who she is, I know who you used, or I know someone exactly like her, or how did you get her, or how did you make her? In the same way, I suppose, as people must have come up to John Millington Synge and said, where did Peggy and Mike is so filled with contradictions, so filled with life. She's so needy in one way and so controlling and ready for the world in another. So I need to ask you, if someone were to say to you, I think that's me, Princess, or where did you get her? Did you see her? Did you teach her? Did you invent her?
That's one of the single biggest thrill of youth for me has been having students like Princess, number one, reading the book and seeing themselves on the page, and number two, believing a character Princess exists on the page, and then coming up to me, like my own students, and saying, we loved Princess. And that's been so gratifying. It's amazing, because that's one of the main reasons I did it. I've read enough books over the years in a class with my students that we don't have a princess. Princess, as I've said, is a distillation. As you know yourself, I've been 14 years teaching, and as I said before, I've seen 4 or 5 princesses every year pass through the school who mightn't necessarily get on to be pharmacy or mightn't have necessarily gone to Trinity, but they've all had a hope and a wish and a dream to overcome obstacles that weren't their fault, they were put in their way. So a princess is all the students and none, if you know yourself. But just to make someone believable like that, and have even my early readers, I had 3 girls read the Princess chapters for me before she was published. I always give them a shout out, Tomalina, Glory and Queenie. Even when they were reading the A4 manuscript, they were blown away that they were reading someone like themselves on the page, which was great. And then we had an actress do the audiobook in the same. So this is the first time she's ever read a part in an Irish context that wasn't to do with being a refugee, or wasn't to do with something that just didn't mean that you're just a character on the street on your own terms. So that was Princess for me, and she worked, and I'm glad she worked, but it took a long time to get there and a lot of work to get her to where I wanted to be. But to have the students now come back to me and say that they love Princess is me done. I'm just so grateful that that's happened.
I think anyone, male or female, irrespective of your race, who's ever thought that staying in a library on a Thursday night until 9 was something you look forward to, was great. People are going to start saying, yeah, I'm a bit like Princess, I stay in the library until 9. But she's a complicated figure. I mean, it's not as though she's a really good girl and she just does everything well. But she really knows how Ireland works. She knows, like a lot of those kids who get all those A's, they have all that way, they have everything worked out, and she does, except of course everything is against her. The hurdles she has to pass. But also, what's fascinating is that she sees something in Angel that he almost doesn't see in himself, that the reader sees in him. But he's so confused, and he's such a good guy, but he's a follower. He's someone who will easily go with the gang, and she wants to isolate him, just get him back from that. And so that's a great drama. Her power versus his, I suppose, insecurity becomes a great drama in the book.
Yeah, and it just so happens a student of mine again today has finished a book, and he said to me, I'm Angel. He said, I've been Angel all my life, and I had a group like that, and he's a Leaving Cert student, and he sees himself in like that, like Princess, and that was important for me, because I think the back to hyper masculinity, and especially for guys like Angel, they're surrounded by this idea of they're limited in what they see, and what's presented to them as what's achievable in life. And it's not necessarily to do with race, it's to do with class as well in a lot of ways. And they don't see an actual way to go and a way to achieve things in life that doesn't present itself in English or American culture. And then we're talking drugs, and we're talking rap music and drill music. And I think Princess just sees in him something more than just being with his mates and talking about stabbing lads and talking about rapping and all the misogynistic lyrics. That he has a sense that he wants to do something more with himself, but he doesn't know how to step outside himself or step outside that circle. And Princess is wise enough or awake enough to see that if he stays with her, if he talks with her, he can kind of form a new road for himself, which I'm glad to see he takes.
Yeah, we've been talking about this idea of masculinity, hyper-masculinity versus vulnerability. And we're talking about Princess as a very powerful, very, figure who really has certain things sussed. But you give her a great vulnerability physically. In other words, that in a room with some young men, she's really in danger, as Tanya is. I mean, it is as though, even though these women are, I suppose, they're more confident. But there are moments when you think, there's one special moment in the book where you just think, please let her be okay. Please don't let this happen. And so you have a sense not just of her controlling the world, but of certain moments where, as a young woman, she's really, really vulnerable.
Yeah, and I know the moment you're talking about, and that intentionally again was we kept that vague, the kind of, the chapter break, and we didn't address that until the very end because I wanted to play on the reader's kind of biases and prejudice and to kind of assume that the worst had happened. So you're kind of in some way surprised at the end. So that was like a technical thing. But again, you're talking about I'm a father of a young 8-year-old girl. She'll be a teenager soon, too soon, unfortunately. But any girl in a group of lads, and as we talked about with Dean, and who are being conditioned to believe certain ways of living and behaving around women, any young girl in a situation like that, especially when they're alone, you have to worry for them, regardless of who the boys are. I think the boys are, we said, conditioned by what's acceptable and how to talk. I think maybe that's changing. And even from the 14 years that I'm teaching in the school, I've seen it change, not only in language used towards each other, but to women, but behaviour as well. So, if this book was to be written in another 6 years, I think that sense of danger in amongst men hopefully will have shifted for teenagers, and it won't be the same sense of trepidation if you're a girl on your own in a group of young lads like that.
I think that you must have a feeling writing this book and publishing it that you're at the cusp of something, that you're in a place of, I suppose, that has a special energy attached to it, and that gives you both a sort of power and responsibility. As an artist, you must feel funny sometimes reading other novels that are dealing as though life is not a struggle for the characters.
Yeah. Number one, I wrote it not knowing it would be published. I think that's a good way to write for someone like myself, because you'd have so many questions then about Balbriggan and characters. So I wrote it not knowing it was going to be published, but I wrote it with a real drive to get it published because of the characters, and I really wanted to see characters like Tanya and Dean and Angel Princess be on the page and deal with those struggles. Like you say, I read so much, and I just didn't see those struggles, especially for teenagers and in modern Ireland being represented. I know we have brilliant writers like Colm Barrett who write teenagers like that, but just in a suburban setting, in a multicultural setting, in a working class setting, in a contemporary setting, and dealing with contemporary issues and contemporary struggles, it was a responsibility, 100% a responsibility, but you only had to hopefully deal with it in such a sense that it was true to the time and true to the characters. And once I was able to do that, it works on the page. Like, I've had, unfortunately, a mad experience where a few schools in the town are listening and reading the audiobook, or reading the book and listening to the audiobook. So I had the weird experience of listening to my own audiobook with my own transition year English class over the last 6 weeks.
This book.
So that's when you are being tested. Every single sentence in front of a group of 16 and 17-year-olds they listened to it. And now at the end, again, it's one of the greatest reading experiences of my life as a writer. On the last word, the class literally broke into applause and clapped, which was incredible. But you have a responsibility to that generation and those readers to be correct about how they are and what they face in life and what they see and what they have to deal with. So that was the book being tested to the max in a situation like that. But I felt that responsibility, and especially when you're listening to people read out every line and you're sitting there with a group of 28, 16, 17-year-olds, if you're wrong on anything, and if you make a misstep on anything, they were going to let you know. And luckily enough, I got away unscathed. I was all right.
That really must have been an extraordinary experience.
Yes, it was amazing because I never thought it would be, number one, read in the classroom. So the other schools in the town told me they were going to read it. So my principal said, well, you're the teacher in the school, so we might as well do it here too. Luckily enough, we had an audiobook, and you could hear the laughter from lines, and a lot of the language was amazing. I thought I'd say it was weird for the kids, but to have the explosion of, like, totally wasn't expecting the kids to clap at the end. I think they were filled with the sense of hope that I hope was there at the end of the book. So that was amazing and a mental experience, but also very gratifying. Yeah.